Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Jellyfish Joining a Fan Channel. It is my honor and pleasure to be joined by co-creator of the Moog Cookbook. He is an author, he is a writer, he is a producer, he is an engineer, he is an archivist, which is very exciting. He is Brian Kehew. Hello, how are you doing?
Very good. Good to talk to you.
It's it's kind of an odd thing because I never really class myself as a. I do podcasts, I do interviews because I'm such a big fan of the music that I like and the world surrounding the music that I like, and it's kind of nice to be in the position to interview a lot of musical heroes and a lot of people who have had an influence on me and people who can help the channel grow as well. So it is quite an honor, but also as well, I watched a truly fascinating interview with you, and it goes into a lot of the things that sort of I don't want to feel like I'm just like repeating what is being said on that interview. So we're going to go in like some different directions as well. But it was a really nice interview because you are. You may blush, but you're world class producer, musician, and to
Thank you.
hear you talk about not to age you hopefully too much, but like sort of a lot of people sort of who are older when they talk about especially the music industry today, they talk about, oh, there's no good music out there. There's nothing. It used to be much better back in the day, all that kind of thing. And I always find that a very skewed way to look at it. But the way that you and the host of the interview analyzed it was very refreshing to me that the good stuff is out there. It is just harder to find. But uh, do you feel that it's a better thing now that everyone has the opportunity to make music at a certain level, even though it is sort of harder for the listener to discover?
It's a good question because I think about it a lot. I remember back in the probably 1990s, I was at a record shop I used to go to, and the owner of the record shop said, "Now that we have samplers, you could play cellos and horns and strings or timpani or a pipe organ from your home." He said, "There's going to be some person up in the mountains that's going to make Pink Floyd The Wall all by themselves." And The Wall being one of those outstanding records because it has such a range of piano songs and rock band and orchestra. It's quite a range of things. And he said, now someone's going to be able to do that. And I find that no one has. And I think the question is it then the sounds that made Pink Floyd The Wall good, or mainly Roger Waters and Dave Gilmour writing that music and then working with top level keyboard players, top level arrangers, top level violinists, top level. So, in other words, I can sound like a good drummer, but I'm not going to come up with the parts of a good drummer. And I can have a good bass sound, but I won't be a great bass player. So, the capabilities of all of our technologies don't make any better music. And so, I'm surrounded here by Beatles thoughts and things because I'm a Beatles fanatic, and realizing the Beatles had about six different microphones to work with in their whole career. And they had only four tracks of tape for most of their career. So the Beatles made better records, not just that I can't get a better kick drum. I can get a much better kick drum than some of the Beatles records. I can get a better, guitar sound than some of the records. Sure. But that absolutely doesn't matter as far as making good music. And it's really about songs and talent. Maybe whatever the microphone can pick up has to do with character and effort and things like that that we can't quantify as much. But I think it's a fascinating question. I think that there is great music out there. It's harder to find. And the reason I think so is I was talking to a friend of mine. Now, I made one of the best records I've ever made for a young girl that I know. I met her through working with The Who, and she was a music student, and then she went on to graduate, but she writes good music. Her name, if you want to check it out, is Megan E. Blake. And we made an EP this last year together that came out really, really well. And she's traditional, I guess if you want to call it, folk style with guitar, maybe some keyboard on it. But we did some experimental sounds as well to make it atmospheric and cool. But when she's releasing this record, the hard thing is if you put out a song today that you've worked on for, let's say, a month or something, 65,000 songs came out this week. That's the number, something like that. So even if I had a black ping pong ball in the middle of 65,000 white ping pong balls, and you went looking for it, even visually, it'd be very easy to spot it amongst the other ones. Much harder to spot good music because you got to take time with it. But it would take you a week or more to sort through 65,000 ping pong balls to find the one great song. So I think that that's the problem is we have a ratio of okay, even decent music fighting against the great music. And so in the old days, maybe the threshold was high to get a record deal, and Stevie Wonder and whoever would get a record deal because they had become better than other people. If they were going to put 50 people behind promoting that record and $50,000 behind recording it, they really wanted it to be great music and they gave it their best producer and so forth. So I think the chances were better that we would hear great music, but I think it's still out there. It's just harder to find.
I agree. And I sort of I guess grew up in the MySpace generation, and I spoke to
Right.
Roger about this as well. Largely because I discovered the extended family of Jellyfish and Imperial Drag, Moog Cookbook, TVIs, all that stuff through MySpace because there were pages available at that point. And as a songwriter, because I have to get over the fact that I'm embarrassed about calling myself a songwriter. I do write songs and I teach it to kids, which is, it's an amazing thing to be able to do. But I sort of got over or realized that I couldn't teach, say, pop songwriting or anything like that, or commercial songwriting, because I feel like you have to have done that to be able to teach it. But at the same time, it's kind of an ever, maybe not evolving, but ever changing situation where you can't really teach what you wrote because what you wrote has come and gone. It may come back around again, but the odds of that happening, in a time period where these kids are going to really try and make a career out of making music is going to be quite hard. It's a hard thing to, like my dad always said when I did my production degree and things like that. He was like, "That's not a real degree. You should learn plumbing."
Yeah, yeah.
And as I get older as well, because when I would go to the college to teach, the college hadn't yet invested in I think it was even just like Logic 10 at the time. And the kids at the time were bringing in their own laptops with more advanced equipment than what we were using at the
Yeah,
college.
sure.
And we weren't allowed to teach. And I was just like, oh, maybe there is something in that, these, I don't want to say like degrees are worthless, because what I realized that should be taken from it is the ability to work with other people and have your horizons expanded and
I
stuff
was
like
going to say, what do you think is the difference? Because I went to proper and formal music school at the university. I was trained. I had, lessons when I was a kid. But what do you think is the difference? Why I do think that's superior if you want to stand out. If you want to just be a laptop musician with a lot of sample libraries and learn to mix, you can be very good, but you won't stand out. You won't have a skill set that is different. Like when I was in university, I would record all the classical concerts. So that was unusual for a modern person to be working with symphonies and brass quintets and things like that, choir music. But I was assigned as a recording engineer, different things. So we would not only record like a pop group, but we would record a classical performance of opera. And I would have to get to experiment with microphones and check levels and things like that. So I'm not intimidated by working with an orchestra or putting strings on something, whereas other people might feel weird about that. And I also know electronics because they taught me electronics at the school, and they taught us what balance signals were and power supplies and things like that. They taught us a lot more about the theories of recording and working, uh, which nowadays it's much easier to get with YouTube and things like that. You can do a lot of your own training and probably get it from some fantastic instructors. But I do think having collaboration, as you said, working with people, and we were kind of forced to work with music we didn't care about. So I spent some time with jazz and I learned all about, oh, jazz is not about loud kick drum and snare drum like pop. It's more about the cymbals on the drums. And I learned how to make a jazz record work. And that's become very useful to me. Working with orchestras has allowed me to do all kinds of interesting things. I'm working on a book right now of George Martin's orchestra scores, and we're going to be putting that out in a few months.
Oh,
So George Martin's family asked us when he was alive to go over to his home and look through the orchestra scores, and then taking the training I had in orchestration and in writing and so forth, we can go through that and analyze the scores. But like I said, I get to work with jazz things and some early hip hop stuff and things like that that I wouldn't have chosen to work on. So oddly enough, my weird job now, which I love, is to go through Warner Brothers old tapes, like you said, archivist, but mostly going through the things in their vault. And they have brought me Charles Mingus concerts and Sun Ra. And I've gotten to work on many cool projects that involve the jazz field, but also we work on heavy metal bands like Pantera, and we'll work on experimental music and progressive rock and punk rock and the Coasters from the 50s. And so having wider experience makes you like an engineer or a producer from the old days because they didn't just do heavy metal. They didn't just do modern electronica. They didn't just do film music. They did it all, those people. And that's kind of interesting.
well, I think before moving on, like from my point of view, with the colleges that I went to, without getting political, I think there's, over the last, and certainly in my lifetime, there hasn't been as much of an emphasis on investment in the arts, and that includes teaching as well. And one thing that I'll probably, I don't know if anyone from my college will see this, and I do apologize, but I was quite vocal about it at the time. I felt there was too much of an emphasis on, because we were also coming through the reality show era as well, where a lot of people saw how easy it was to become an artist by applying for a talent show and stuff like that, and the
Yeah.
college were more supportive, in my opinion, of that as a career progression than they were of, making it. I don't think it's necessarily settling to say that, you're not going to be, if you're not going to be in a signed band, that shouldn't be the only avenue for you. You could work in a covers band, or you could work as a teacher, or you could work in production, or there's a lot of different avenues that you can take from that, or you can just again broaden your scope and just get to meet new people, and form bands, and just push yourself, outside of your comfort zone and stuff like that. So that, I mean, I do feel, and it feels. I always say, when I say this, it feels like I'm making excuses for the fact that I'm not like sort of like sort of further than I could be. But like personally, I'm it has taken me a long time to get to a point where I am happy with what I'm doing, because I'm also a full-time carer for my sister, and I realized that the the investment in the sort of activities for adults with disabilities is quite minimal as well, and being able to offer, songwriting courses, like level one kind of stuff, or to be able to
Yeah.
write songs with and stuff like that. That's incredibly rewarding for me. And yeah,
We have that new world. Like you said, you have to stay home and doing this great thing with your sister. But I think that that is the new opportunity. If I found a great guitar teacher in New York, I could do lessons with them from here.
mm,
Or if I found a great drummer that lived in Bristol and I wanted to work with them, I could send them tracks to play drums on. So we have a new openness, certainly options to do new things, but I don't think it necessarily makes things better. It's just another set of options. So if you have spray paints and you have oil paints and you have a digital iPad to paint with, it doesn't make your art better or worse to use any of them. It literally comes down to the artist.
I agree with that, and that's one thing I really enjoyed about the interview as well, that I saw with you on YouTube, and I'll post a link to that as well. Uh, that I go through phases. I think every artist does this. Go through phases of not believing in anything that they're doing, or thinking that their music isn't good enough. But for me, I think the music is good enough for me. But also, I like the music that I write enough to have ask other musicians to take part in it. And if those musicians thought the songs were shit, that I don't think they would want to. And even if you're paying them and stuff like that, they may not want to attach their name to something like that. And without, I'm not just promoting me, I swear, but like, I've been lucky enough to work with uh say Roger or Linus of Hollywood or Aaron Kaplan and Taylor Lock, and these people who I think appreciate my fandom, but also my fandom of them, but also they like the songs, and it is a very nice um not justification, sort of like a an acceptance that I am doing something okay, I guess.
Yeah, true.
This is
And
this
don't
is
forget
turning into
that
therapy so early
this
on.
is a modern world allows, and again, this is scary for some people. Some people look back to the old days for what was right. But if you were an artist, let's say you were on a billboard on a major highway and you had a record in every store in the country, it didn't mean you had any money. They had ways to screw you out of it. So you might get famous and then come home to a broken car and a family asking for money and not have any. So it doesn't mean that you're in control of good things. They would put the wrong record cover out that you hated. This happened to so many people. So better in some ways, worse in others. The buses were worse, the life was worse, the pay was worse. But at least now, if you're in control of your own destiny, it's down to how hard you work. And it's down to, well, I see many people that want a record deal. They want a record company to put out their record, but that means that someone else has to believe in you more than you do. So when I came to writing books, which I've done a few books now, and they've done very well, we actually shop them to standard book companies. And I think that's a very close parallel to record companies. You sign away your creation to them. They keep most of the money for it. They give you some back in exchange for promotion and pushing it out there and letting people know it exists. But that was necessary in the old days, or seemed to be. And then now it's not necessary. So you can build your team of, for example, publicity, PR. You can, work with people to make your record together. And if you have Roger Manning and Jason Faulkner and cool people like that on your record, other people will check it out because they're involved. You
Yeah.
don't need to work so hard to sell it because those guys' names are on it. So there's all these opportunities where without a great expense, without a great challenge, you can create something like that and market it to the one person in Thailand and four people in Singapore and 10 in Italy. And that's cool. That's maybe enough to get 250 copies out there, and then you can fund or at least indulge in the next one.
And one thing I tried to do with this channel as well and with the page is have it be a platform for those who are influenced by Imperial Drag, Moog Cookbook, Jellyfish, Uma Jets, Jason, etc. And
Thing one,
have it
thing two. Yeah.
have it be somewhat of a platform for them because again, there's a million radio stations out there as well, but it's kind of nice that there is an audience that is here for this interview for the page, and yeah, it's just nice to have a little corner of the internet that people enjoy and has brought people together. And
Oh, I was going to ask you a question because when was the first time in? How did you hear Jellyfish?
oh, 2007. My boss, Steve, I was working, and he brought in the Land of Pure Imagination album, as well as the LEO album, Alpaca's Ogling. And he said that because he had to import them, and he talked about Roger saying this is his first solo album, like proper solo album, and he mentioned that he bought Alpaca's Ogling for the two lines that Andy sings on Goodbye Innocence, and I was like,
Yeah.
"You're insane! Like you spent like £35 or something."
Completed. Yeah. Right.
And he went out and I put on Land of Pure Imagination and it was Wish It Would Rain, which just especially the bridge, how the sort of so I feel like I should know more about what I'm talking about, but there's kind of like a kind of like a modal change or something that goes into the bridge,
Yeah.
and then it comes out of it into I think a key change at that point, and just the way the harmonies are constructed, and it was just one of those moments where the walls and the goosebumps and everything, and I was just like, this is what I want my music to sound like, in terms of there was so much going on, but it was so clear to hear everything that was going on. And, because I'm a huge Queen fan, but, Roger himself said that Queen didn't really experiment too much with the level of instrumentation on a particular song and stuff like that. And this just had all the colors that I didn't know I was looking for. And then so I credit and for the huge fan of Jellyfish, I mean huge, huge, huge fan. It's that and the first Jets album, Demolition, that really influenced and gave me direction where I wanted to go musically. But it was 2007, and it was an interesting time because McFly had just released Baby's Coming Back, um, and it got to number one in this country. And the Jellyfish tribute album was just about ready as well. And I was trying to convince my band to submit a song for the bonus EP that came out because we're looking for some extra songs. And my band were like, who are Jellyfish basically? And didn't really know. And I've spent the last like 15, 16 years telling anyone that I ever meet who Jellyfish are. And if they mention something, like say Scott Pilgrim versus the World, um, that has oh, I should know this. One of the guitarists from Spilt Milk on it. I'm just like, oh well, he's in Spilt Milk, etc. And most conversations I ever have come back to Jellyfish in some form. But yeah, that's
It's
that's me.
fascinating because I remember when they first came out, I had a group of friends. We used to get together on Friday nights, and I mean, there was vinyl, there were some CDs, mixtures of things, but we were all record collectors. So we would meet on Friday night, have dinner together, and stay up all night. And the rule was you could play two songs in a row, no more, no less, and then you couldn't tell people what it was.
Uh,
And so you'd put on a record, everybody'd sit about, two big speakers, would listen to the music and talk about it and things like that. But this guy put on this record, and I thought it was a 60s record at first, but it was the Belly Button record. So it was the beginning of Jellyfish, and it had just come out. And I think he bought it for the cool cover, that it looked like a referential thing to things he would like. And of course, it turned out to be an amazing record. So he played us most of, if not all, the whole album, two songs at a time that night. And I remember going, wow, this is amazing. And it did sound very much like the 60s. It was referential to those things with harpsichord sounds and some of the parts that were not common in 70s music, 80s music, and even 90s music to that point. They were reaching back to that time period, which was cool. And sometimes that's a theme. TVIs and Moog Cookbook and things like that. There's a retro element to it. But especially with Jellyfish, they were so good. I went to see them live and I was just blown away by the harmonies. I could not believe that a live band, short of Wings, who I revered, could sing so well live.
hmm.
And that was a feature, although there were bands that had backup harmonies, but backup harmonies usually aren't that strong. So I saw the original band, and then Spilt Milk came out. Again, a change for the band, not so retro, but still some elements of that. Much more expansive in the production of it, and I love that work too. But there's things like Russian Hill, where Roger scored and arranged this beautiful string section. It's incredible work and it's very high level. You could have hired him alone as an arranger just to do your record, but he's a great keyboard player, good songwriter, And so he has this multiplicity. Roger is a extremely talented individual, as was Andy and Jason Faulkner and Eric Dover and these various people they worked with. Tim, they're all good friends of mine, and don't know Andy, never met him, but everybody else in the band, new, old, or otherwise, have become good friends. So I first knew them through that experience, and then seeing them live a few times, both versions of the band. And then one day somebody called me about buying a keyboard, and this guy showed up, and it was like, oh, it's Roger from Jellyfish. And we became good friends right at that moment. I think we spent at least 4, but maybe 6 hours together that first day we met. He literally came to buy an instrument, and we spent the whole day together. And we went
Only
around town, and we went shopping for keyboards. And he was the only person I'd met besides a friend of ours named Dave Kersner, who was interested in older keyboards because technology wise, I guess the only parallel would be, do you know any friends that have old computers? Not many, right?
yeah,
Almost
yeah.
none. In fact, does anyone do you know have a vintage laptop from the 90s and still use it? Nobody. It's cool now to like old keyboards. In fact, it's the thing. But back then, it was like buying old computers. People would say, why would you do that? The new ones are better. Uh, there was no point in it. What we found that we liked the knobs, we liked the interactivity. We didn't care if it did perfect string sounds. We wanted the sounds from those records. And we'd grown up with things like, Keyboard Magazine and videos and people on stage surrounded by all these cool keyboards, mostly because the keyboards did one sound. That is your piano. That is your Hammond organ. That is your synthesizer. That is your Mellotron or something. So they had to have so many instruments because they were limited, but in a way that made for a great visual. And he made these great performances happen with Rick Wakeman and Keith Emerson, all of our idols. And so on and on, we said, well, why don't we buy up those old keyboards? Because they're so inexpensive. They were like $100, $200, $300 for almost anything.
Hmm.
And uh, meeting Roger was a great moment because we had suddenly another ally, a person who could not reinforce our strange disease of buying old instruments, but really saw the good in them and liked to use them and thought that they would be good. And we were really, I guess, early 90s. Yeah, probably. That that was the height and the beginning of grunge. So grunge music was all guitars, not even a piano or an organ or any traditional keyboards. And everybody was pushing back against the bad 80s when it was Depeche Mode and Thomas Dolby and all those things that I still love, Human League, whatever. But it was all synthesizery, a drum machine, and not organic. And so people pushed back and went far into the grunge world, and heavy guitars and loud drums and natural people screaming was like the mode of the day. And we were punk rockers, both literally that we love punk rock, but we were also going against the grain. If they're doing that, we're going to do this. And so we were buying, disco synthesizers when there was nothing disco in the world at all.
Uh-huh.
So it became a good time period to collect and get those instruments. And then from that, the Moog Cookbook project, which I see you've got something on the wall behind you, like a magazine
Yes.
or something.
Oh, it's the cover. I've got Bartel there, and
Oh,
we've
good.
got
Yeah.
him there. Yeah.
We could talk about Bartel too, because that was a weird offshoot project. But when we did the Moog Cookbook, we literally did it in a bedroom at my home. There's some pictures on the web, I think, of us or just the keyboards so filling the room. We must have had 30 or 40 old synthesizers. Even down the hallway of the house, they were lining the walls because Roger had been buying so much. I'd been buying so much. We just wanted a place to use them, but not one band would let us put a synthesizer, even a melody, on their record. So we're going to make the most keyboard album of all time. And we know we could reference the jokes. We thought they were funny as well as cool. So it's hard to explain, was it a joke? Certainly it was, but was it reverential and respectful to Keith Emerson and Depeche Mode and the popcorn song and disco? Absolutely reverential too. So in some ways, it's nodding the cap to that, but also And again, we got to juxtapose by doing grunge, heavy rock covers
Yeah.
with disco sounds. So when we're doing the Offspring, we said that'll just be Donna Summer's "I Feel Love," one of the greatest records ever made. Donna Summer, not the Offspring, but Donna Summer.
Mhm.
And we know how that sound was made. We know how the parts go together. We know that it's a clavinet, do 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 do. We know how the string synth has a phaser on it. We do all these things, but then we play the Offspring song through that machine, and it comes out sounding like the Moog Cookbook version of things.
I want to obviously get into Moog Cookbook a lot, but in 1990, when Jellyfish were releasing Belly Button, what were you doing at that point?
I was out in San Bernardino, which is a big town about an hour to the east of Los Angeles, so a massive suburb, if you will. It's a big town, lots going on, but not as exciting and trendy as Los Angeles. So I was coming into concerts. I think we were coming out of the heavy metal period, which I was into as well. I always grew up, liking all kinds of music. So I worked in a music store selling records. And then around that time, I'd gotten a job in a guitar shop selling guitars and amps and things like that. And I was currently beginning going to, well, at that point, just finished university, but I was still teaching at the university. So they brought me back after I graduated
Hmm.
to help teach the students. They didn't have, I don't think it was a lack of teachers, but they wanted mid-level or lower level people to take care of some of the courses and mostly the labs, running people through how to work the equipment and stuff.
Was there a long-term plan at that point? Did you know where the next few years were going to lead you?
I don't think so, although my goal was to record records as an engineer or producer to make pop rock records in studios with bands, which was definitely still viable at the time and lasted for quite a few more years. I won't say it's gone away. People all around me are making those kinds of records, but I think it's more vanity projects. The market is not buying those records. The market is not demanding them as much. There are still people who want to get records by artists, but it was a big time for people having managers, making videos, rehearsal halls, clubs everywhere, shows every night. You could go to any one of 60 or so concerts on a given night in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
Same in probably London or any major city would have 50 or 60 live shows with maybe three or four acts per night playing for an audience of live music. And it was transitioning because we remember at the time DJs were coming in, and that was filling rooms of people with only one person performing and things like that. And we hadn't really had a lot of playback music. That was an unusual thing. So performers had to have a synth player or a string section or a live drummer, which is absolutely not necessary now, the way people think.
Yeah, that's true. At the time as well, were there a range of artists coming to you, or were you very selective on on who you wanted to work with in terms of styles? And also, as a second part to that, when a new artist would come in, were you sort of giving them the benefit of your wisdom, or were you also was it like a co-reactive thing where you were learning something from each project?
I wouldn't say I had any wisdom at that point yet because I was beginning. And yet, um, I think anybody, like if you found Roger Manning when he was 15 or Andy Sturmer at 20, they already had knowledge and enthusiasm and intelligence, musically and otherwise. I mean, those are very smart people. So they can see things, analyze it, keep it, or throw it away. They're really making good choices from the things they hear. And especially with their background in jazz. I mean, that's what I find is fascinating. Do you hear any jazz as a flavor of Jellyfish? Nobody describes them that way, but it informs their music
Mhm.
and their projects in a way that is very subtle but brilliant. Thomas Dolby, when I first met Roger, we talked about how he was a jazzer at heart, playing ninth chords and 13ths and things in pop songs and making it work, which is how Steely Dan and quite a few of the great people like Burt Bacharach could do it. They knew those extended voicings and colors that jazz chords could bring without sounding icky like bad jazz sounds. So we're always aware of that flavor of it. But so I was influenced by so many things. And again, like I grew up with electronic experimental music. I love classical music since I was a kid. Almost every kind of music I liked, even country. I was a big country fanatic in the late 80s
Mm.
because we had a
Of
revival.
country at that time, or of classic country?
And well, what happened was there was a revival on the West Coast. Very strange. Los Angeles had an amazing country music scene in the mid to late 80s.
Hmm.
They didn't have one in Nashville. They didn't have one in New York. In LA, there were these bands like the Blasters turned into uh, the Alvin Brothers doing shows. The Knitters was X. Lone Justice was an amazing band. We had Dwight Yoakam started out here, and these people were playing old country. That's 1950s style country, very twangy. It's
Yeah.
not like the 70s country that was popular. It was the really old country that's the cool stuff that people like Dolly Parton grew up listening to, Loretta Lynn grew up listening to. And this is like Rose Maddox and the old Hank Williams stuff and things like that. People were playing music like that in Hollywood. We had a big scene and I really loved it. So, whereas I didn't like 70s country too much, and certainly later, I don't know what kind of country was doing in 80s and 90s. It was like pop metal or something. But I was into that stuff too. So, it's an interesting mix of influences when at the same time I'm going to punk rock show, and the next day would be a heavy metal show, and the next day would be country, old school country. And it was a really diverse and interesting time for music. So there was lots going on, and it was very healthy, I think. Yeah.
Well, one thing that you talked about with the George Martin uh, book that's coming out with his orchestral work and work outside of the Beatles. The only thing that I really knew of, and that it's because of Queen, was his work with the Temperance Seven.
Oh,
Um,
really?
the sort of pseudo 20s jazz kind of thing, because you'll know Queen, the song Good Company in
Of course.
particular. Brian May said that he took that sort of that arrangement from the Temperance Seven, and that kind of that fascinated me, and I sort of dug deep into it. So I'm really
And
excited. I know
they
very
also
little
did
else.
bring back that Leroy Brown is another one that
Yes.
Queen did in the style. Yeah.
Oh, so and his work with the legendary Cilla Black and and
Oh,
others. So that's the thing. I don't know too much about him, but I'm also very excited that the movie's coming out as well. So is it coincidental that it's happening at the same time, or um
a Beatles movie?
no, the George Martin movie?
Wait, I'm not sure about a movie for George Martin. Is there a new one?
Yeah, there's a trailer and everything. Yeah. It's
Not even heard about this. That's amazing.
I will send that over because the clip that they've shown is the famous story of when he met the Beatles for the first time, and he's kind of telling them, "This is what you're doing wrong. This is what you could do better." And he said,
Oh,
and then there's that classic line of, um, "Tell me if there's something that you don't like." And I think it was John who says, "Well, I don't like your tie for a start," and he took his tie off. So yeah,
so this
there
is
is a George
interesting.
Martin
So
movie coming
it's a
out.
biopic of people playing George Martin, doing his life as an actor.
Mhm.
Oh, I see.
I'm
To
gonna
me,
Google.
I'm a bit worried about it because I'm such a massive Queen fan. I didn't really love the Bohemian Rhapsody film and Elton
I
John fan. I'm a massive film, and I didn't love the Elton John film because I go, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. That's not true. And those things bother me sometimes when they change the truth. And the only reason I say that is because Elton John's not interesting enough to make a movie about what actually happened. Freddie Mercury is not amazing enough, one among 8 billion people that had that life, that you can't make an accurate movie about it. It drives me crazy. Yeah.
I am no fun to watch Bohemian Rhapsody with at all. The Elton John movie, I give it a pass in my mind only because it's a musical, and yes, he may not have played Crocodile Rock at the Troubadour, but he
He
didn't
may
sing.
not have flown through the air.
Yeah. So there is a flight of fancy with, and I think it was superbly acted as well. Whereas Bohemian Rhapsody, I like nothing, and I know my stuff about Queen. I like nothing about that movie whatsoever. Um,
The guy that plays Brian May is dead on perfect, and I loved it, that part of it.
yes.
But they didn't even get the other ones close, and the history and the timeline is wrong. And I don't know that it's completely inaccurate, but it's mostly inaccurate.
Yeah, it's not great. Again, without potentially, I don't know, getting too into it, I think it makes Freddie almost ashamed, like on the movie, to be gay, and
Right.
that's how it comes across, and that he it felt like he needed the band, and he was nothing without the band, and that Mr. Bad Guy was shit, and it was just like that's a great album, like you know,
Funny, the only time they show him in bed is with a woman.
yeah, um,
They were fighting so hard, and I know why they did it. They were fighting so hard to sell it to mainstream people in the world that they wouldn't be offended by this portion of his character, which was a large portion of his character. Although I'd say it also has nothing to do with his music. He could have been
true.
uh, asexual and he would have still been Freddie Mercury.
This is true. I could do a whole thing on how much I don't like Bohemian Rhapsody, but I won't do that. But but I would like to talk a little bit about Queen. So I know that there's a slight um reference on the Moog Cookbook album saying that you didn't use digital, which was a reference to Queen saying that they didn't use synths at the time as well. So, how influential are Queen to you, and in what area, as a writer, as a producer, as a player?
When I first grew up, my favorite band was Black Sabbath, and then that was replaced by Queen in the later 70s.
As a 180.
Um, well, I mean, and then became Queen, and I didn't love all the 80s records, but I still bought them and I still listen to them. And I think Kind of Magic Side 2 is the lost great Queen record. It's amazing. But Side 2, not Side 1 with the drum machines and the disco dancing. But Side 2 really rocks. It sounds almost like Queen 2 all over again. But uh, Queen is very important. I'll tell you a story that's rather interesting and it sums it up. I've only met three people that can answer this question correctly. Um, because I'm such a big Queen fan that it's a little crazy.
Okay.
And I ask people who say they're big Queen fans,
Oh God.
who
Here
plays
we go.
who plays guitar on the live version of Hammer to Fall?
Spike Edney.
You're the fourth person ever to answer it correctly. And the other people to answer it correctly were Pat Smear, Taylor Hawkins, before he joined the Foo Fighters when
Oh,
he was in Alanis Morissette's group. I met him.
hmm.
And then my friend Julie Lawrence, and she said Spike Edney, and I hate him. And I went, whoa, you're even bigger. You know more about him than we do. So Julie's the biggest Queen fan and one of my best friends, but she was obsessive. She flew to London without a ticket to the Freddie Memorial and stood outside the stadium to go see it. And then someone got her in.
Oh my God.
That was how dedicated she is. But those two guys who ended up in the Foo Fighters together are massive Queen fans. And you obviously know the thing too, because this guy unannounced walks out to play guitar on Hammer to Fall in the 86 tour.
Hmm.
And they never announce him. People like, who is that? An Italian superstar? Is it someone from REM? People don't know who that is. But it was Spike Edney, the offstage keyboard player. Well, why don't they have him on stage playing keyboards? Why do they need a second guitar in Hammer to Fall, which is one of the dumbest and simplest guitar songs ever written? It doesn't, and yet they don't have two guitars on Killer Queen. Why don't they have Spike Edney play guitar on Death on Two Legs to make it sound more like the record? But they bring him out for this one weird song that is so easy that any child could play it and it would sound fine.
Hmm.
It's a riff rock song, and Brian's fully capable of covering it. But they bring up this unknown guy. They never announce him, and it drives people crazy if they even pay attention. Who's that guy? And why did Queen ever need an additional musician until the modern days?
It's true. Well, they had Morgan Fisher who was with I think Mott the Hoople, and
Mott the Hoople, yeah,
yeah,
he was their first keyboard player. And I always joke with Pat Smear because I met Morgan and we talked about that. He also
Oh,
plays on Pink Floyd The Wall. Most people don't know that he's a keyboard player on The Wall.
hmm.
But I asked him about it because I'm such a Queen fan. And then I always joke that it was Morgan Freeman, who's the black and white actor. But I was like,
Uh,
you know when Morgan Freeman was on Saturday Night Live with Queen? And Pat's like, it's not Morgan Freeman. But Morgan is a friend of mine, and I visited him a couple times. We were in London, in Japan, where Morgan lives now. He was in Mott the Hoople, which is very close to Queen as far as friends and family and otherwise. But we were on a Who tour over there, the first time the Who had ever been in Japan, and I invited Morgan Fisher to come to the show. And he was walking
Fantastic.
around and backstage with me, and Pete Townsend came out of his dressing room in the hallway and goes, Morgan, what are you doing here? And he recognized him from 40 years earlier. Maybe, yeah, 40 years earlier. He looks different and everything, but Pete was such a big fan and loved him as well. So it's kind of cool, especially when Pete Townsend recognizes who you are. It was cool.
Yeah. Uh, I would love at some point for us to do an entire just chat about Queen. Um,
I'm there.
oh God,
Yeah,
yeah, Queen, everything. I mean, um, I'm not the collector of Queen that I am of Jellyfish because it's so vast,
true.
and so expensive. Whereas with the Jellyfish, thankfully, and to be honest, I feel like I, in slightly created the monster because when sort of we created the group, and then I'm the only person that say owned a T-shirt or a promotional piece or something like that. Um, then people were like, sort of, it kind of set the tone for how much people were prepared to pay for certain things and stuff like that. And there aren't
True.
like a lot of huge Jellyfish collectors out there, but you know,
It's off the scale. Yeah.
Queen is off the scale. And but music-wise, though, I have everything, in some form or another. I I haven't listened to the remix of Queen One yet. I-
This is my favorite Queen
I've
album.
I've heard The Nights Comes Down, and I was like, oh, the pitch correction and stuff like that. I'm just accepting it for what it is. But
I
how do you
haven't
feel
heard it
about
yet,
it?
and I've not heard any good reviews of it yet. And oddly enough, that's my favorite Queen album. It was Taylor Hawkins' favorite Queen album. This is one of the reasons we bonded as good mates and
Mm,
friends for so long. Taylor was an amazing guy. Probably the Police and Queen were his favorite groups. Maybe a
mm,
little bit of Rush close in there, but really Queen, he knows it cold. And we talked about the first album, and yet Brian May, when he would talk to Brian or Roger about it, they would be like, "Oh, the first album, we didn't quite know what we were doing yet, but there's something about it that I really love." And I don't know why, because I came to it later. I mean, I bought probably News of the World first,
mm.
and then went backwards for a bit. But I really love that record, and it's less produced, maybe more rocking. It also has the soft side with Jesus and things like that on it. So
Yeah.
doing all right. These beautiful songs that are like Queen, but they're not as glossy. They're not as expensive sounding. And we know the story of them making it, late night at Trident Studios and things like that. I was
Mm.
just over there a month ago and took my friend and go, this is where those things happened. But I'm obsessed with it. However, there is our friend Bill Inglot, who's a producer I work with through Warner Brothers. He found a tape when we were working on some Pretenders project. He found a tape that said Queen, and he pulled out the tapes and had them transferred. It's different mixes of the first Queen album done
Oh,
back in the day, and it sounds way better,
that's
in my
interesting.
opinion. Now, this was done in the 70s, so I'm saying probably then. And when I spoke to Ken Scott, who is a Beatles and Bowie and Elton John and other things recording engineer, he said, "Oh, those could be my mixes." He said, "Are the tom toms very loud?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's my style. Make the tom toms big." And he said, "We all did mixes. Roy Baker, myself, Robin Jeffrey Cable worked there." And he said, "We all mixed Queen. We all had our take at it." And he goes, "Those could be my mixes then." And I think they're superior. But I mentioned it. I met Roger Taylor once at a Foo Fighters show at it's Milton Keynes Arena.
Yeah.
And when I went to see the Foo Fighters there, both Taylor and Pat were like, "This is the Hot Space Arena. This is where Hot Space went on tour."
Mhm.
But oddly enough, and this is perspective and strangeness of it, that when Queen played there, they sold out the place. I don't know, 60,000 people. When the Foo Fighters played there, they sold it out twice. And it was strange for Roger Taylor to be there. I get to meet him for the first time and only time ever, but he was back there. We're talking about things, and it was weird for him. You could tell that the Foo Fighters are more popular than Queen was.
Mm.
And I prefer the 70s Queen. Many people do, but they were bigger in the 80s because of their growth and upswing. You know, the Ramones started playing little clubs and things with their great first record, but they weren't so popular yet. You know, later on, they're playing practically stadiums with their lesser albums. So most bands have that arc, whether you're Radiohead or U2 or anybody, your best music is often the early ones. And then as you get a following, it just grows and grows. You become more popular. And most people make lesser records later on, but they have a bigger audience.
There's a wonderful video I watched last night by a British musician who claimed that this song was the best chord progression in the UK of the 1980s, and the song that he picked was The Miracle. And he goes so in depth about the chord progressions that are used and how the melody interweaves and how they're able to change key and get back to the original key after the first chorus without even really noticing
Yeah.
it. And there's so much going. I mean, again, we'll talk so much about quick because there's the clip as well. I don't know if you've seen it, but when Taylor had the Coattail Riders, he did that small gig in London by King's Cross, and he convinced Brian and Roger to do Long Away, which Brian had never sung before. The only video is this really grainy phone footage,
Yeah.
but it's
For that.
fascinating to see.
Well, obviously,
Oh,
the influence of Queen is still felt, and it's especially obvious on Spilt Milk.
mm.
When you hear joining a fan club, and in fact, one of my friends hates the second Jellyfish album because he said there already is a Queen, and I was like, it's true. The Queen was original, and Jellyfish is often referential. But in being referential, I think that they're as good, and I call it a tiny strike against any group like Moog Cookbook or somebody that copies another style purposely. I find that to be it's a negative, but it's also inspiring. And if you're aiming for those high ranges like Queen, you might end up with some A+ songs, which you will find on the Spilt Milk record. You know, Glutton of Sympathy and things like that. These are not Queen songs, although Joining a Fan Club's a great song that leans Queen. There are the other ones like Russian Hill and Glutton of Sympathy that are absolutely not at all like Queen, and Queen wishes they wrote them.
Yeah,
They're that good.
I agree.
So
So, sorry.
I think there's also a thing about bands that have a sense of humor. One Jellyfish song is serious, the next Jellyfish song is Sabrina Paste and Play-Doh. Same with Queen. They'll have a joke song right next to a very serious song. And I love bands that do that. The Who did it, the Beatles did it, the world's greatest bands did it, but there are no funny Radiohead songs. There's no joke Radiohead songs.
No.
Tom Petty didn't really do funny songs, and some people do, but I think it's a sign of a very high level group that they're allowed to take the piss and have fun. Emerson, Lake and Palmer did it. They
Yeah,
made funny songs next to the most serious ones. And so Bowie did it. I think it's kind of interesting to say that it's a sign of intelligence and musical confidence that you can do a Sabrina Paste and Play-Doh type thing and then also do a very serious song right next to it.
I agree. Right. And having four writers as well that can come from different areas really does
True.
help. And I always thought that before we do move on, I always thought that Roger Taylor always it was the person that kept Queen most modern and sort of contemporary. He was very new wave with a lot of his stuff. Like Fun It came before Another One Bites the Dust. And if you look at even things like Don't Lose Your Head and he
Well, look
was
at the
Radio Gaga for the synth area. I think Roger was as influential in the band at introducing the synths as much as anyone.
and that came after Fun in Space
Mm.
when the Queen record said PS no synthesizers with the English spelling synthesizers. Roger said PS 157 synthesizers.
Yes.
He was he was doing that to Queen on his solo record. And the year that Fun in Space came out, it was my favorite album of the year about among anybody. It was better than everyone's record. It's so good. And at one point, because if you go to Foo Fighter Studio here in Los Angeles, there's a poster signed of Fun in Space, signed by Roger Taylor in the studio. And Taylor and I were talking with Pat and others about we really want to put on a show with Roger Taylor doing those songs from his solo records. And of course, maybe some Queen things, but I always felt that it's a little unusual. But what if you took all the modern times rock and roll, I'm in love with my car, Fun It, all those things that Roger wrote and made a greatest hits of Roger Taylor, it would be a pretty damn cool record.
I agree. I agree.
And
Omnivore
so,
put out a greatest hits of his solo stuff
solo
recently.
record, yeah, yeah. And
Um,
it's funny with Roger's solo stuff; it's hit or miss for me. But Fun in Space to me is a really great record, really interesting. Um, and again, he embraced all that. Then they got into Flash. Then they got into using synthesizers on the game and so forth. So there's a lot where it became a normal thing. And as you said, he kind of kept them modern. And I remember an old interview where they talked about somebody was talking about Queen and said in the studio there's two of them that are really involved and really pushing and pulling. And I thought, well, that must be Brian and Freddie because they have the most tracks. You know, you hear Brian doing all these layers of it, but evidently, and if you watch the One Vision studio session, it's actually Roger and Freddie who are pushing and pulling the whole time. Those
and
are the ones they were talking about them, but nobody mentioned it. I thought it must be Brian, but as you know, he's more passive and agreeable and workable, and he does what's needed. But it was Roger trying to be this and let's do that, and Freddie pushing and pulling in his directions, sometimes for the better, sometimes not.
Roger's sort of fascination with science fiction as well. I mean, evident on Fun and Space, but one of my favorite Queen songs that no one knows is A Human Body.
Right.
I think it's a wonderful song. That should have been on the album, in my
Yeah.
opinion. For me, that is my favorite A side and B side as a combination. Play the Game and A Human Body. They complement each other so beautifully in terms of tempos, the laid back sort of style.
Yeah, I've
Um,
never, I mean, the game is a strong record, so I can see why they might not have put it on, but I think it could have replaced some things on that record. But maybe, and again, we don't know. Sometimes it's because you have so many songs and I have so many songs, you're not allowed to have one more. It may be personalities and ego more than it is songwriting quality. So it's hard to say.
I understand that. Did you ever hear the surround sound mix of the game?
No.
They couldn't find all of the master tapes for coming soon. So there's actually a couple of different lines on the
Oh,
remix version, I think with different lyrics as well. And it's not the cheapest thing to find anymore. And I'm hoping that how they've done the box sets of The Miracle, etc., they'll do every single album eventually. I'm sure they will. So but yeah, it's worth checking out. So what to drag us back to sort of the to Jellyfish World. So when you were buying synths with Roger, I know this. I mean, this was post Spilt Milk, and Roger wrote something on his website at the time that Jellyfish had taken so much out of him with the stress and everything else, and they made these beautiful albums, but it's almost like a marriage breaking up, etc. So, without like delving into Roger's mind too much or anything like that, did Roger come at you with? I just don't want to be Jellyfish. I want to do something completely 180 and delve into another area of music that I like.
We'd already been friends for a few months, I think, and we were not doing anything other than just being friends.
Okay.
And one day Roger came to my house and he said, I just had a meeting with Andy right now and I think it's over.
Ugh.
And he said, and I said, I was shocked as well, but I was surprised. And he said, well, he really wants to be more singer-songwriter, you know, leaning towards not being Bob Dylan, but, you know, more focused on just songs and less about presentation and less about the orchestration and the overtopness of it. And he was really into pure songwriting. And so Roger is still a songwriter too, but he really loves the presentation. And so he said, I'm going to probably start a new band with Eric and Tim. And and that took a little while even to put together as an idea. But it's one of those things that that was a transition time. It was very uncomfortable for him, but I also saw he thought I can do something cool with a little bit more control of it. Since Tim and Eric, as musicians, had joined Jellyfish later, Roger was kind of like a senior member, but those guys were highly creative and highly supportive, and they
Mm.
loved working together. I know that they had troubles on tour, just dealing with Andy and the way he wanted things to be. They were in a different camp. He was in a different camp. So it was kind of already pulling apart in a direction where we're going to stick with him. Roger's going this way. We want to kind of make popular rock music. And then they had a little more influence in the 70s styles, things like that. So Imperial Drag came together. They found Eric Scotus, our friend, who's still a good friend, who played drums for them, a great drummer. And then they put this band together with Joe Carnes on bass. It was a local guy they found. Tim went off to do, I think it was thing one, thing two first.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the next progression. And he was
That's
far.
a deep, deep cut there.
No,
For
it
what this
is. I
channel's
know.
about.
Yeah.
What this channel's about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. But I mean, they're all friends and they're great people to deal with and to work with. So uh that period was sad because Jellyfish was so good, and I would call it promising, even though they delivered two of the best albums I own. Those are almost albums that bands would do when they were mature. They came at it with one and two being like most people's sixth and seventh record.
Yeah.
You know, like This Is Your Night at the Opera, News of the World time period. And those guys are putting it out for one and two. Although it would have been interesting if Jellyfish had gotten more serious in Andy's way. They were already away from the cat in the hat outfits. They were already a little bit more stripped down, and but it's still a serious band, but they were still tied to that. So I'm curious if Jellyfish had become a more serious band of just hard playing musicians without so many overdubs. Probably would have been great songs alone, and they could do it. But I like Roger's idea. Music is kind of visual, music is kind of presentational. And so Imperial Drag came along, started working, and then Eric Dover got offered to join Slash's group. And Guns N' Roses was the biggest thing in the universe. I mean, they're like almost like Taylor Swift is now, but nobody's that big. But Guns N' Roses was huge. And then Slash stops, breaks up Guns N' Roses and said, I want you to be my lead singer. What can be done? I mean, everybody thought that would be huge. And so they already had a record deal. They already had an agreement to work together, and they wanted to. But for now, we're going to do Slash's music. And Roger said, "Oh my God, I'm just about to start my new thing, and it's about to be great with this amazing band, and now it's going to stop. And what am I going to do?" And around that same time, Roger's longtime girlfriend since college is Charlotte Elberfeld, and she's still one of my best friends. I see her 3 times a week, and she always jokes because the three of us, love collecting what we call Moog records. Moog being the wrong pronunciation of Moog, but it was all these goofy records from the 60s, all on vinyl of like switched on Bacharach instead of switched on Bach. There's Country Moog, Nashville Moog.
We
Uh,
find this stuff in thrift stores now in this country, and they're
yeah,
fascinating. I love them.
yeah,
Hammond albums
especially
as well.
in the UK, they did a lot of like synthesizer hits records with a cute girl on the cover. And it was just a bunch of session musicians playing a top 10 song on a synthesizer, hoping it would do well. So we liked them both in that they were bad and good. They were amazing musicians, especially Roger, who loves arrangement and 60s style session players. They're full of those people, but they're really bad synthesizer records. They're like the most plain vanilla synthesizer sounds that are stupid, like a cartoon. So I remember like their voicemail, their answering machine. I would call them up and put Sabrina Paste and Play-Doh dee 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 on a synthesizer on their voicemail to make them laugh. And then we started joking about making a what we called a Moog record of our own. How do we do that? Is it original? Is it funny? And then we're thinking, well, let's just do something that's against the grain of what's out now, but let's do it like those records used to play the top 10 hits of like Mud and the Sweet and whatever was big at the time, Boney M or something on
Yeah.
synthesizer in England. And we would do that here with the grunge music. We tried a few things like Hole that didn't work. Some songs didn't have enough melody, but then we started doing that kind of thing. So that was actually Roger's relief from Imperial Drag being stopped for almost a year. Literally, they were rehearsing, they were writing songs. I had worked on their demos a bit. They recorded some and then had me mix the demos, and we were all family and friends, and they were so good. It was an incredible band. And but I remember Imperial Drag just having some difficulties. You know, they got stopped a few times, and that band should have been huge, just like Jellyfish. There's nothing that says, even right now, that it wouldn't be very popular because the quality was there. But just whatever reasons, it just didn't happen. Mainly, there were things like video was all important. So the first Imperial Drag video was called Boy or Girl, and they spent $100,000 or something on the video, and the director left early before it was done filming and basically pulled the
Really?
plug on it and then cut it from the existing footage, which is too bad. They were going to have some more nakedness in there. They were going to have more of a crazy orgy scene, but tasteful that it could go on the air.
Hmm.
But you know how it is when hot girls are in a cool video, people watch it over and over again on MTV.
Hmm.
But that got cut, and the director made an okay but kind of confusing video for that great pop song. So,
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
yeah, it's really literally what happened. And they were so frustrated, so angry. And yet, what can you do? This is our director. He's got something in the morning. He says, I've got enough footage. I'm done. I'm out of here. And that was their big moment. Having that video
Mm.
would make or break you. And they didn't really have a great video. They had a good one. So it got added to a lot of stations. I remember when Imperial Drag was coming out, and I was like, here it comes. And they were like the most added group in America to radio stations when they have a new song that they play. Imperial Drag was exploding. And then the video came and didn't really hit, and it went downward. So certain like the Grays, those who know Jason Faulkner's world, and John Bryan overlaps because he's on Spilt Milk.
Yeah.
But the Grays was a super group of some of the most talented people in LA. All of them incredible musicians and songwriters, and they've all done well in different ways. But the Grays should have done better, but it also became something that didn't quite work out either. And unfortunately for that situation, the Grays was on Beavis and Butthead. The only attention they got was a joke thing.
Yeah.
Although again, I don't know that the Grays had a strong hit single on their record. It probably wasn't that song, or it probably, but they had great qualities and they had great stuff on their record. And I never saw them live, but I'm told if you saw that band live, like those guys could do anything. They were playing off each other, having fun. But I also know that the Grays had some kind of meeting right before they went to the studio to talk about what they wanted to do. And that's when they began to fight, was in this meeting before the sessions. So they were kind of struggling. Somewhere here, I have a video of the Grays, an EPK promotional video made to talk about this new record coming out. And
Yeah.
I haven't put it up online, but I probably will at some point. It's enough years down the road. But it's literally talking about making the record, and they're in the studio pretending to be making the record. It's already finished and things,
Uh,
but they're talking about what they want to be and their styles and so forth. The funniest part is the drummer of the Grays, who's probably the least known of those guys, is now the head of Warner Brothers Records. He's gone on to take on work with Metallica and everybody, and he's just gone up and up and up and up. So of all the people, including their great successes for all of them, doing different things, um, Buddy, the musician there, went on to work with Apple Music, iTunes. Jason's done a ton of great things. We got to play together again, Jason and I, in the French band Air.
yes, I want to get
Roger and
onto
I,
air as well. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Roger and I were in Air, and then we went on to do the next record, which is Virgin Suicides, and Jason joined the band and played with us at that point too. So we had a nice overlap.
Moog Cookbook lives on as well because I hope you don't mind me calling it Moog. I'm so used to it now. But
We always do. We always do.
Kelly Watch the Stars just got an anniversary release, and the Moog Cookbook remix is on there as well.
Oh, I
Um,
forget.
oh yeah, yeah.
I
Do you
haven't
know
worn this in like 15 years.
that's amazing? Do you know who gave me a Moog Cookbook t-shirt? It was Cassie Eric's.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah.
That's
Um,
great.
the problem is, again, as a collector. I have so many Jellyfish, Imperial Drag, Moog Cookbook, TVI, all the t-shirts, but none of them fit. Because
Yeah,
I'm what you would call a husky gentleman, and but the thing is, like
I know what
some
I
of
mean.
them, it's insane how much like some of them sell. Because Roger was selling some old Jellyfish shirts on his site and stuff like that, and I happily wear bootleg shirts. I shouldn't say that online, but
I know what you mean. It's I do the same thing with bands I love. I often can't find, even if there's an official shirt, it's not the one I want. Like I
yeah.
love the one you chose. It's a very good, clean version of the logo.
Mhm.
Almost looks like a glow in the dark thing, but it's a very
Does it has the
clean,
spilt
good
milk
looking
thing on
blue.
the back as well? The
Oh,
drop of
nice.
milk. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I probably bought three bootleg shirts for bands I love this year, and it's a good way to show support, not just from obviously you're not supporting them financially, but a lot of the bands have broken up or gone away. But to be out there wearing that shirt or doing something. It's funny you mentioned though. Cassie was just over. She and Eric were just over visiting like a week ago. We were hanging out with Charlotte too. So it's a small world.
it's wonderful. Yeah, they've been so nice to me when I was able to come out to LA. I came out both times near Halloween. So, and you know what their place is like for Halloween, and we watch Phantom of the Paradise each time, and yeah, and Cassie makes incredible cookies as well. I don't know if you've ever had them, but
I think I did before. Yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah. And yeah, I mean, I've got a gift I need to send her as well because and I know it's been a tough time for her, so I'm hoping
you know
she'll
it's
enjoy.
interesting, and I'm just going to pitch it to you now because Charlotte was there since like high school time. I mean,
Mm.
now, excuse me, college time at University of Southern California, where she and Roger went to school, and they ended up dating for a long, long time. And that's a lot of cross parallel things going on there with Andy and Roger and herself as well. She's very much involved in lots of things, but she has stories and interesting insights, and was there through Imperial Drag and TVIs and all those things too. So she's a great friend of ours. She's very intelligent and fun. So I always hang out with her more than almost anybody. And she's kind of the inspiration that got the Moog Cookbook thing going, for one thing. But, you know, just last week in her garage, I saw a jellyfish shirt sitting on the shelf. There's one sitting right there, an old one. Yeah.
I shouldn't say this. It doesn't matter now. I'm sure Roger probably knows, but most LA thing I probably ever did was I went to their old house where the studio was and had brunch with Charlotte and Eric and
Oh, good.
Cassie.
Okay, you've done it. You know
Roger was,
Charlotte. Great.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Roger was out. Roger was not there, but the studio was now like a storage closet, and she was like, "Would you like to see some jellyfish things?" And she showed me just things that like absolutely blew my
Or maybe
mind.
she should, again, if she should be on the show and bring some along, I think that would be fun. I just think that she's, again, if you're doing this for fans and history, I don't know if she'd be interested, but probably that she knows it so well. But the house there, I mean, we did some Mook stuff for that Bartel record. We did the
Mm.
Christmas songs at Rogers Place there at the studio. And you know, we love to work together. Roger and I have never had a fight about anything pretty much, but we always get along. And I've never laughed so much with anybody in my whole life. I mean, we have been on the floor, face down on the carpet many times because we laugh so hard. Making ourselves laugh is how we do things together. That's why the Moog Cookbook worked better as a joke that was serious. Like there's skills in Roger's arranging and my synth programming, and we have very different skills. He's 10 times the player that I'll be, and I'm a conceptualizer and a lot into sounds, engineering and synthesis. I can do all these sounds and things that we're referring to. So there's a nice parallel there, but also overlap. I love working with a partner. I almost always try to do that, just as Roger did with Andy, or you know the guys in Queen or Beatles. There's Keith and Mick. There's always partnerships that are stronger than the individuals by far. And if people don't realize that and want to do their solo thing, I think they're missing out. You should find someone who's good or better than you, join with them, and
I
you'll
agree with
both
that.
go 6 times, 10 times higher. I mean, the struggle was at the same time, Roger's doing Imperial Drag. It's about to come out. We did Moog Cookbook as a joke in a bedroom. We mixed it at my university just for fun. And then we went to put it out. It took a year and a half for some label to say yes to it. But thanks to mostly our good friend Lindsay Parker, who's now a great interviewer and around the world making music things happen, she kind of told the label, you should sign these guys to our label. I know what to do with this. This is really cool. So I think about a year and a half after we did the Moog Cookbook record was actually when it came out. We had actually made the tracks and tried to shop them around for a while. And we were sure the Beastie Boys or somebody was going to make a synthesizer record, like vintage synth record, and nobody really had. We were afraid someone like Lenny Kravitz or the Beastie Boys were going to put out a vintage synthesizer record first. We'd already done ours and finished it, but eventually a great manager man by the name of Carter, who was not our manager, but really loved the project. He was manager of the Eels, and he shopped it around just for the hell of it because he thought it should come out. And so he got us the record deal on Restless Records, which did come out. And then immediately the week after it came out, MTV wrote the company and said, we want these guys to perform live on MTV on the news program, which was weird because we weren't a band. We'd never played anywhere or didn't intend to. It was just a studio project, but it's a huge deal. It was something like 80 million people watched the MTV News every week back then or something, and they wanted to play on the news show as part of a story about old synthesizers are coming back. So Roger was on tour in Europe, I think, and I was on the West Coast. And I said, look, I'll rent some keyboards in New York. I'll bring the spacesuits with us. We'll fly to New York and we'll rehearse in a hotel room the night before we play for 80 million people. We'd never played together. So we made backing tracks of the drums and the bass. And then he had two keyboards and I had two keyboards, and we went on MTV the next day to play on the show with Kurt Loder and Tabitha, what's her name, Soren, and did the show, which was so weird. But we weren't really a band, and I think we had painters coverall suits on instead of real spacesuits because we didn't have outfits yet. And we had hired the helmets. You know, we rented them somewhere, so we rented them again. It was just weird. So we had this unusual leap upward in attention and success without even trying because we weren't trying, which is kind of an interesting lesson. Yeah.
So what two questions from that. What led to the alter egos and the spacesuits? What and apologies if I'm being like very naive of this or uninformed, but do Daft Punk
Ah,
credit you as influencers in that sense?
I'll start out with the Moog Cookbook first and then go to Daft Punk afterwards because it's in that order. We
Okay.
made our first record and we just thought that, I mean, we could have been ourselves, but we originally were going to call it the Amoeba Teens. But before there was a massive record store in Los Angeles called Amoeba that everyone knows how to spell it, we felt it was a spelling and a pronunciation challenge for normal humans. There was an Amoeba up north, a record store that was great, but we thought we better change it to an easier name. And Moog Cookbook has three double sets of O's, and the double O's can be made into space helmets. So we were like, that's cool. And we knew of all these records from the 70s where people had thought synthesizers were futuristic when they really weren't. They were of 1969, of 1972. They were instruments of 1974. So the time when people were wearing bell bottoms, it was the synthesizer age. They weren't really of the future or of space, but we like to poke fun at that. And then the fake names we made up. I don't know. We weren't hiding anything. We just thought it would be funny to be characters. So Rogers was Miko Eno, Miko being a disco record maker, producer who had these cool records of, lots of disco tracks doing Star Wars and things. And Eno being relative to Brian Eno,
Yeah.
especially in the Roxy Music period, which we like to reference. And then mine was Uli Nomi. And that was a bit of a contrast because Uli comes from Uli Roth of the Scorpions. I chose that just as a strange sounding name, but he's one of my favorite musicians. And then Nomi was Klaus Nomi, the singer who passed away in the early days of AIDS. And he's a great, great performer, concept artist, and all that stuff. So we did that. And then I think just before, around the time of the second album, Tomas and Guy from Daft Punk came to Los Angeles and they found me in the music store where I worked and said, "Oh, we're big fans of Daft Punk, and it sold like crazy, and everybody in Paris listens to Moog Cookbook. It's great." And we knew of Daft Punk. Their first record was out, but the first record they have no outfits. They have
Hmm.
no. They're kind of like they're not a mystery, but they have people in bunny suits and they have dancers and they have things. So there is no visual for Daft Punk. But then afterwards, they adopted theirs are robots, technically. Ours are spacesuits, but it is very
True.
similar. I mean, we
Yeah.
are synth duo, and it's sort of retro music. Their presentation is different than ours. They certainly have a much better budget and amazing spacesuits or robot suits, excuse me. And but that's how we met the French band Air. Soon after Air, who we'd heard their single and we knew a little bit about them, had come to see me at that music store too. And those guys became really, really close friends.
So with the how many performances did Moog Cookbook do in total?
Maybe, I mean, if you count the TV shows, maybe a dozen, something like that. I
I
think
know
we did a few in LA.
there's one on YouTube that I think either was it Charlotte maybe filmed it or
Oh, that could be the record store. That might be the first time we played anywhere. I think that was our first show at a record store here in Westwood near LA. We did a few shows uh, around town, mostly like promotional. We played in a freaking bookstore where people were reading and drinking coffee, and there's a picture of us somewhere. I'll try to find it. Of us in the distance playing during the afternoon, and people are working on their laptops and drinking coffee while we play, completely ignoring what is hard to ignore, which is two guys in silver spacesuits jumping around and doing stupid things. And then we played a strange one, which is up in Hollywood. There's a thing called Universal City Walk. Universal Studios theme park is there.
Mhm.
And they also have a shopping mall there. And they booked us to play like a Thursday at 4 or 5 p.m., time when nobody shops for records in a very difficult place to get to. So I think we played there to like five of our friends. And then in the back of the store watching us was Michael Jackson,
Wow.
who happened to
Okay.
be walking through the store at that time. And then right after we finished, I grabbed one of our CDs and ran up to him and I was like, "Hey, I want to give you a copy of our record." "Oh, thanks very much. It sounds really cool. I'd like to use the old synthesizers." It
Oh
was
my
really
God.
funny. I knew he would get it. So somewhere out there, he's got it. And he came in as we finished playing. It was very weird. And then we
That
did MTV in Europe. We played in England, London, did a show live on Spice Girls Week on the MTV in Europe. And but no
I've
shows
never seen that.
opening. Yeah, it was weird. And then Spice Girls were new, so it was the big thing.
Yeah.
We played, I think, three times at South by Southwest in Texas and four times in Japan.
Oh wow.
So there's
So how many of those were recorded, do you know?
a none, pretty much. Unless, I mean, people didn't have cell phone cameras much back then. There was a film, a videotape of a TV show that filmed us at a club in Japan
Mhm.
with a 3 or 4 camera shoot. And then years ago, some guy had asked for he wanted to put us on his early like podcast show on the web, and we didn't have good ways to transfer the VHS, which I can do all day long now, but we sent him the tapes and he never returned them and we don't have copies of them. So there was a show with like multiple cameras filmed in Japan. It was cool. And we were also, it was nice. We were opening for Imperial Drag on that tour. So Imperial Drag had 4 shows
Mhm.
at this series of clubs in Japan. And then since Roger was already there, he already had his instruments there. It was pretty cheap and easy to bring me along and rent a keyboard or two to have us do the opening act for Imperial Drag.
Now, not that yourself and Roger were prone to make mistakes or anything like that, but with something like the the set that you had and the the Moog Cookbook concept, it seems so rigid that you can't make a mistake because it would be so noticeable. So was
We
there
made
like a
mistakes. We made mistakes. I mean, the instruments themselves, well, probably not as much as we did, but we had a lot to do, and we one of our goals was to not be boring. If you're
Mhm.
just playing a song straight on a synthesizer with 1 or 2 hands, it is rather boring. We didn't have a light show. We didn't have much in the way of things. So we would insist that there be a new joke every 30 seconds. The joke would have to be like dropping something, making a noise, funny actions, or we would, we'd hold up a t-shirt and then everybody go crazy and we'd throw it out in the crowd. Then we'd hold up a CD and everybody would go crazy and then we'd throw it out in the crowd. And then we'd hold up a roll of toilet paper and then throw it in the crowd. And then we'd hold up a used pair of underpants and then throw them in the crowd. Just stupid things like that, just trying to be funny. When we did a song Cat Scratch Fever, we had electric cats that literally just like went like that. And they were so stupid and funny that while the song was playing, we would hold the little cats up, just trying to keep it interesting. And so lots of things to remember means lots more mistakes.
So
But it did have mistakes, but the backing tracks are recorded, drums and bass.
hmm.
And then we had four hands free to play the rest of it. So we could pull off much of the records, not exactly like the studio album, but close enough.
So the first album was enough of a underground success for there to be a second album. Is that what led to there being a second album?
There was a two-album contract, which is pretty standard.
Okay.
And the first album pays, well, don't want to say, but it was
Oh,
almost nothing. I mean, we wouldn't even do a week's worth of work for they paid us for the first album. Um, and then the second album was guaranteed double the budget, but we're certain. I mean, the label kept lying to us about how much we're sold. Like at one point, we went to Japan and they said, "Congratulations, you've sold like 6,000 CDs over here." And then would say the royalty statement, it would say 1,200 CDs were sold.
right.
And in France, somebody told us at our album release party, "Oh, we shipped 4,000 CDs to France. France is going crazy for it." And then Daft Punk and Air and tell us everybody has this record. And then the statement comes and said, "You sold 600 CDs in France." Probably not true. And
Mm.
then at one point they were signing another group to the label and they said, "We've done great with the Moog Cookbook. We've sold almost 80,000 records with them." And our statement said something like 6,000. And I said, "Are you lying to these friends of mine who you're trying to sign to the label, or are you lying to us?"
Mm.
The guy at the desk had no answer. I said, "No, I can call my friends right now. They want to sign with you, but you're lying to them about how many we've sold, or I actually believe you have sold that money and you won't tell us because you owe us money."
Wow.
So we were going to audit them, which is how you do it. You get a lawyer and a bookkeeper to go in and look at the books. And then someone who was insider in the industry said, "That company has two sets of books. If you audit them, you'll never see the real numbers." There you go. That's
Oh,
how
wow.
artists get screwed. Yeah.
Good grief. So what promotion was done for the second album? Was it just based on the gigs that you did with Imperial Drag? Because you weren't doing TV interviews, certainly,
No,
and there
I
wasn't a
think they
music
really,
there wasn't a music video for the second album, I don't think, was there? So
it's strange. We talked about it. We had a thing set up. We were going to do a video with Paul Thomas Anderson, who was a friend of mine who wanted to do it, and then he was unable, but he was working on a video concept for us, and we proposed a $10,000 budget to do this video with some real actors in it, big people, and they refused it. They didn't want to do the video, even though we had A-list actors agreeing to be in it, but we never got a video for the second. I mean, the video for the first album is Black Hole Sun, and it was like $1,000
hmm.
done by a new director who had just begun but had some capability to make a video. So it's low budget, but it works. And there was nothing for the second album. There was some press. I mean, they did mail it out to various people.
Hmm.
So it is very strange what they did and didn't do, but we got one phone call. They said, "We want you to go to Denver, Colorado. It's a 2-hour flight. We want you to go out and be interviewed on the major rock and roll station there. And then we'll have you play a show that night, which is sponsored by the local club, and the DJ and the radio station host that club that night once a month." Cool. So we'll go do one show and we'll talk on the radio to thousands of fans listening as they drive home. And we were there in the studio and we're talking about that. And they said, "So when are you guys going to make a new record?" and we're like, these the DJs said, "We love your music. It's so great. We play it every day. When are you going to make a new record?" And I said, "Last month." And they're like, "We didn't get it. We don't have the new record." And the radio promo guy that had flown out with us was sitting there. And I said, "I wonder if the radio promo guy has a copy with him." And he's like, and they go,
Wow.
"So what's on the new record?" And we said, "Oh, it's classic rock hits like David Bowie and the Eagles and things like that." And they're like, "Oh, that sounds amazing. I wish we could hear it." And I said, "I wish you could too." Here we are interviewing on this big station for an hour, and they hadn't even sent a copy to the station. So weird.
My
Anyways, that
word.
it's
That's
a it's an exercise in lack of quality, I would have to say in some cases, but that's what happened. I
what
you
would
know I
the
do like both records. Some people like the first record because it was innovative and new at the time.
yeah.
Second record took more work, although some people think it's not as much fun and goofy, but I love the amount of effort we get to put into the second record. So
What would the single have been from the second record if there was going to be a video?
I think it was going to be Boston More Than a Feeling. I'm
Nice.
not sure. I'm
Okay.
trying to remember if that was it because one point we were going to do a Western thing, and then we were going to do something based upon a Verve video. There were a couple of people that even pitched ideas. Some of them were quite terrible, but it was kind of interesting. I mean, a Western would have been funny.
So the Bartel stuff, was that recorded around that time?
Yeah,
Oh,
most of it was outside and later, even when like the Foo Fighters commissioned us to do a couple songs. If you watch Monkey Wrench or you watch Learn to Fly,
hmm.
those videos start with Moog Cookbook songs as people are doing funny things. And then the Foo Fighters video kicks in. So Dave was a big fan. He really, really likes the first record and used to tell me it was in his car all the time. So that's good. And he's a good guy. I like him a lot. And they have had us do a couple things for them, and then remixes for people. Or the Klaus Nomi film was coming out and put something together for that. Uh, Not much of it is, of course, we don't do original music, but there is a little bit that we made for a film called Lost in Space. Was a remake of the old original TV show.
Remember it well.
But they
Yeah.
literally had everyone in town submitting, every rock band, every country group. Hey, who wants to pitch us for the Lost in Space? So we sent them one, and they're like, "Oh no, this sounds like the old TV show Lost in Space." We exactly interpreted that theme song through the Moog Cookbook filters and made it sound cartoony. They're like, "No, it has to sound like the Dust Brothers." And we're like, "Okay, so we'll make something more moody." And I really love the second one we did. It has a lot of great parts. Mostly it's Roger's compositions and ideas, but he's a master at those things. So we had a lot of cool sections, and it's a great set of themes and things put together.
Hmm. But the
So the
one,
Bartel record, we had all these tracks put together, and we thought, what are we going to do with all these things? Surrender was a Cheap Trick song, and I forget what we did it for, just some outside project. And we go, well, people have never heard these, so let's make a record of them ourselves. And we just made 1,000 copies of it. That is one of them.
hmm.
Yeah, hard to
Um,
find now.
it is hard to find. Because I was going to ask you about Wymus as well. Um, the Christmas EP that was available on Bandcamp for about 6 days.
Okay, yes, that must have been a Roger thing. I let Roger do all kinds of marketing or whatever he wants to do with it. Mookupuk is in the past for us, but not in a bad way. We love it. We talk about it. We have fun with it. But
I think we need to petition
uh,
Roger to put that EP back online.
the Christmas tracks were done for a specific purpose. We did shows on the East Coast, and I keep forgetting about these things. I think it was three or four, where it was one of those rock and roll Christmas things where they might have the Chili Peppers or the Cure or whatever. So we played on these shows with all these cool bands that were happening at the time, like Veruca Salt or the Specials, and different people were playing, and we would play usually between them as like filler music. And we don't remember it much except for the one show where everybody just hated us. They hated us more than, and for good reason, because they stuck us out on a stage with no monitors. Well, these are electric keyboards, and we have backing tracks. So when you can't hear your keyboards and you
Yeah.
can't hear the backing tracks, what's it going to sound like? It's probably sounded terrible. So we just got screwed on that show, but we laugh about it now. It's one of those things.
Yeah. So, where did you get that outfit? Because that's some outfit.
Strange enough, Roger owned these things already. Those are from Roger's closet. And
Chris said that about some of the stuff he wore as well. He said it was just stuff that Roger had bought from thrift stores over the years. Yeah.
he has a good collection of different things. So I think it's one of those things that we didn't have a specific idea or look, but let's not be spacesuits for a minute. And then what's strange about it is uh, a friend of ours is named Bill Bartell, or was. He was a strange character. He's so interesting that right now I'm making a film about him with another friend of mine.
Ah.
It's almost done. We've been filming it for years. Bill Bartell is an iconic weirdo from Los Angeles. Everybody in LA knows him. Ask the members of Kiss, ask probably Iggy Pop, various people around the world. They all know him. He was sometimes a great friend, sometimes an evil character. That's why we're making a movie about him because he died years ago, but he was so interesting, and he's the reason we know about Billy Idol. He used to hang out with Iron Maiden and name some of their albums. Uh, all kinds of stories about things. So Bill was a character, and we decided for no purpose we're going to name this third album. We were thinking of calling it Leftovers, so that's why the cover has circuit boards and food on it.
Yeah.
And yet we had made up the graphics, but at one point we just decided, no, we're going to call it Bartell. Yeah, that's it. It's a plate of circuit boards with syrup on it. And then we decided instead to name it after Bartell, this guy that people know but is not famous. And evidently, Bill, who always made fun of other groups, his band was called White Flag. They were making fun of Black Flag. His punk rock name was Pat Fear, referencing Pat Smear. Everything he did was a reference to something else, right? He
Uh,
had an album called Volume 4, just like Black Sabbath does. Um, he did all those things. So when we named an album after him, it actually freaked him out and he got really weird and almost mad about it. So that's it. So,
you have to let us know when the movie makes it out and in what if it's going to be
yeah,
streaming or in theaters
Roger's
or
in it. Roger talks about it. He was
ah.
connected to Red Cross, heavily involved in Red Cross.
Hmm.
He wrote songs on their album. They wrote with him. They had a group together called Tater Tots where they played covers of things, and the Red Cross people are involved in that very heavily. So yeah, the Bartell movie, if you look it up online, bartellmovie.com, or I forget what we called it, but the full name of it is The Secret Lives of Bill Bartell.
All links will be posted below.
Yeah. And the
Below.
trailer's up there right now. You can see a trailer for it, which
Oh,
is good.
nice. Okay. Oh, that's very exciting. The one documentary that I hadn't seen was the Moog documentary.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
so I'm wondering, I mean, from your knowledge, is that readily available? Is it on
it
DVD
used to
or?
be, and it was quite common. And Roger and I went to the premiere. However, I think it was this friend of ours who we met there at Hans Fiestelad did it. He's a good director, did all these things, but he was taking it to show the behind the scenes human that is Bob Moog.
Mhm.
And Bob was a very caring and kind and warm person. So they show him feeding chickens and they do all these things. And he's traveling the world a bit. And they show his grandfatherly, at that time, good natured spirit. He's very humble, he's very sweet. But a lot of people wanted a story about synthesizers, and it's absolutely not that at all. So I still think that there's room for some kind of thing. Bob's daughter is doing a documentary about her father, and I don't know what that's going to include, but I think it's going to be more about Bob the man. And I don't know how much of a historical timeline. But if I was doing a film about Thomas Edison, I would want to show his accomplishments on a timeline and show how those kind of things. So I think if I was doing a film about Napoleon, I would want it to be part one, part two, part three, moving through their life and how it changed. So I don't know what the new film is, but they've had a couple Kickstarters for it. And it's another film about Bob Moog, the man.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Yeah, there's lots of stuff to look out for then. So for those who are interested as well, do you still work like freelance with independent artists? And is there a way to contact you if people want to do that to
Yeah,
work
I
with
think the
you?
easiest thing is I have a website that I never look at, but it's up there. And the
Uh,
purpose is just so people can find me. It's briankehew.com. You can link to it easily. And it has basically coverage of different things that I do, like writing books or mixing music. Independent artists, like I mentioned, Megan E. Blake earlier. She's a great singer and artist who I just did a record for, but I don't get to do much of that anymore. But real recently, I've been doing a lot of mixing for people because I love to mix. I'm very fast at it. And as long as people aren't picky, some people really want every tom tom placed a certain way. Or I like to work quickly. I always work quickly. So does Roger.
hmm,
So working quickly on something, you get the best result, I think. You can always spend 2 weeks finishing a mix, and it may be more detailed, but music doesn't deserve that much attention right now. People spend 2.5 years making a record, but that record will be heard by 45 friends. Whereas in the old days, Alice Cooper would record an album in 10 days, Black Sabbath in 2 days, and then millions of people would hear it.
yeah.
So I like the process of doing things quickly, relatively, and leaving a little bit of looseness or even not a flaw, but just lack of perfection, because perfect music tends to be boring.
I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things though that because I'm a huge fan of I don't know if you heard, but I'm guessing you have the old Stock Aitken and Waterman stuff. Like I'm
Yes.
kind of a huge fan of that, but it's largely it's mainly because of the melodies, not necessarily the overly clean production.
Well, they
Um,
also have great arrangements too, and
they
arrangements
do.
is a secret weapon. Hard to explain, but you were talking about working with songwriting and sort of coaching and teaching people songwriting. When I talk to people about that, because I work as a producer, I always tell artists, the song itself is the bit that you can bang on the couch playing a guitar or a keyboard. That's the song that can be taken in different directions. But to really make a record of it, the record needs parts and the record needs arrangement. Now, the art of arranging can be anything from strings to just drum machine processing. It's really shaping sounds to bring out the most in the music. So I love this art of arranging. I'm not a songwriter, never wrote a note in my life, but that's where some of my strength is in coming up with something like a fuzzy guitar doubled with a banjo to make that sound interesting and make it work. So
Mhm.
I love that kind of stuff, whether it be acoustic or electric. And I think when I talk to artists, when I'm talking to songwriters, I can't coach them on songwriting much other than if they're too repetitious, I try to get them to change or have an intro that has nothing to do with the song. Think of all the great songs that have a weird intro and then they kick into the song. And
Yeah.
there's many that do that kind of thing. Or you can go in a bridge or a break like Whole Lot of Love. It just turns left and goes away for a whole minute into, hi-hats and drums and theremin sounds and yelling. Has nothing to do with the song, but it's a great famous record. So there are so many records like Bohemian Rhapsody that are the biggest records of all time, or Space Oddity, which starts out here, and then there's Liftoff, and it goes over there. Two different songs, basically put together almost, as is Day in the Life by the Beatles. One of their biggest tracks is just a bunch of pieces sort of stuck together in a beautiful way. So I tell artists to imagine that it doesn't just have to be verse, chorus, verse. And if you're doing these things, try to make it not so typical, not so repetitive, because we've already got a lot of those songs. But I think even more so when you talk about Stock Aitken and Waterman parts, if you can hear a drum part that's not just, but it goes instantly, you know what record that is, whether it's your record or somebody else's, but there's a drum part or a bass part that's not bum, 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 bum. But if the bass goes bum, 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 roo, bum, 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 roo, that's a part that makes this record stand out from all of the records.
Mhm.
If you put that with a crazy drum part and a great keyboard part that goes dee-dee-dee, 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 then you're starting to build a track that's just on C minor, but it's already more interesting than most people's records. And then you plug your great song into it and you have a great record.
That's a great way to end this. We've done this over 3 parts. People don't know this, but yeah,
Yeah.
I wanna thank you for doing that. Quickly, what is your favorite Beatles cover? Like as
Oh,
yeah,
good question. Uh, uh, Got to Get You Into My Life was actually written for, I was going to say Billy J. Kramer, but it's Cliff Bennett and the Rabble Rousers. It was written for them. And then the Beatles did it first and put it out, thereby screwing them. But if you listen to Cliff Bennett doing Got to Get You Into My Life, you can see why Paul McCartney wrote the song that way for a white soul singer with a horn section.
hmm.
And that's what happened. So that's a pretty cool cover.
I always liked Steve Harley and the Cockney Rebels version of Here Comes the Sun.
That's great.
I was
Also, just for fun, if I think you can find it on the web, but Dave Gregory of XTC recorded Strawberry Fields Forever by himself with a 4-track cassette recorder, and he nails it.
really.
All the parts. It's amazing.
I watched a documentary on Strawberry Fields, and I'm sure they talk about the chorus. They actually played it maybe a semitone higher and a little faster, and then they slowed it down when put mixing it. So they recorded the chorus separately to the verse, maybe, or
It's actually a very strange record. They were
okay.
two separate recording sessions, completely different arrangements. So the Strawberry Fields Forever original version is the band playing guitar, mellotron, bass, and drums.
Hmm.
And let me take you down because I'm going to Strawberry Fields. It's a rock band arrangement, but kind of mellow. That's the first half of the record, the first minute of the record that you hear, with the flutes playing on the mellotron, so
Hmm.
forth. But then John Lennon didn't like it, so he told George Martin, "Why don't you do one of your things with it, like we did with Eleanor Rigby, like we do with Yesterday? Let's do it that way." So he did one with the Beatles playing crazy percussion, digga-ding, 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 all the way for like 8 minutes. And then on top of that, just a raw track. George scored low strings, which is cellos and bass, string bass,
Hmm.
but no violins, no violas, and then 4 trumpets. And so that's a weird arrangement. Drums, tribal drums by the Beatles, cello's bass, and then 4 trumpets. And then they recorded that, and John goes, "I like it too, but it misses what I was originally liking about the original version." And then John said, "Why don't you just stick them together?" And George said, "Because they're in different tempos and different keys." And John said, "Figure
Right.
it out." And so they did. They figured out. They slowed one down, they sped one up. Literally, people get this wrong. You cannot splice those two tapes together. They won't work because one has got to play slower, one has to play faster. You can't splice them together. You'd have to copy one at a new speed, then splice them, then slow it down. But they did splice 2 versions of the record together to make Strawberry Fields.
That's fantastic. Oh, there's so many more questions I could ask just about the Beatles and Queen, and I would
Beatles
love,
is an
ser
endless topic.
seriously love to do more on Queen if you're able to do this again. I'd really appreciate
I
it.
think that'd be challenging but fun. I mean, Queen is such a great topic.
I'm wondering what I have to
And I
hand.
still go see them. I mean, my friend Julie and I, we always go see Queen with Adam.
Mhm.
I've also seen, uh, every time Brian May came around, I went to see him on his own. Roger Taylor never toured the USA, but I almost got to see him once in London with when he was doing the Cross, but I just couldn't go.
Oh,
Such a fan that if there's any member of Queen in a room, I'll go see it.
yeah,
You know, it doesn't have to be with Freddie. Freddie's overrated as far as he's as great as he could be, but the rest of them are, I think, as important.
I agree with that. Well, yes, I've seen them with Paul Rogers twice, then with Adam twice. I saw the final London showing of We Will Rock You, and Brian and Roger played on the very final one at the Dominion.
Great. Wow.
That was fun. Because I never got a chance to see it until then, and I saw Brian with Kerry Ellis on that acoustic tour that they did. And then I saw Roger do a solo tour, which was a very cool. I mean, right next to here, I don't know if I could. This might mess everything up, but oh, I've got lots of wrestling stuff, but I've got an Electric
There
Fire
it is.
post. Yeah,
Yeah. I remember that period.
very good underrated album, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, like his best produced album. I like that album a lot. It still sounds very fresh today. But that's the thing. And Roger sometimes gets criticism for not having evolved as a songwriter, but he's written a huge range of stuff. When
Sure.
and I thought Outsider was really good. Did you hear the Outsider live album?
No, I don't know it.
I'll send
Got to
you the
hear it.
tracks. Well,
Good,
like
good.
I shouldn't say that online, but yeah.
I know, I know. Well, we'll
Um,
we'll continue to talk about Queen someday, for sure.
yes, we will. And for very, very last thing, kind of as a collector of sort of Jellyfish and surrounding projects, paraphernalia and stuff like that. So what was that out there? Was it just the CDs and the T-shirts? Because I know there was album flats to
There's
promote
a
this.
vinyl of Moog Cookbook from Japan. Now, I only
Mm.
have the vinyl disc in a empty sleeve that somebody sent to me, but it's got the label, it's pressed. I'm like, whoa, what happened there? Again, never saw any money from it. We don't know what or when or how it came out, but and there's been various people have approached us every year. We just finished one a month ago where somebody's like, "Hey, I want to put out Moog Cookbook on vinyl," and we've been actually leaning into getting a box set of all three put together that have to license the first two from the label, which used to be Restless, is now Universal. But wouldn't it be cool to have a vinyl set of all those records?
I
That would be
agree.
cool.
TVI's
I think
got
there's
a
a promo
re-release.
CD of the first album. I never saw promo CDs of the second album. Yeah,
Mm. Well, yeah, TVI's got a re-release, so I think Mook Cookbook should definitely. Um,
it's pretty popular. I mean, I guarantee you there's 100,000 copies of Moog Cookbook out there somewhere. From the
mhm.
numbers I know, that's a lot. It's big success as far as I'm concerned, and we never knew about it until we started getting clues from people all over the place. But a few thousand here, a few thousand there, blah blah blah. We'll never know, but it at least is known by people all over the place, which is nice.
Yeah, it really is. Well, look, I want to thank you for doing this. It's truly been a pleasure. I wanted to make it different to
Cool.
the other interviews that I saw online as well, because um, I felt like they asked all my good questions that I was going to ask you. But
Okay,
it's
well,
great. It's great that we could go in like a lot of different directions and stuff like that. And I think the fan page will be very excited to hear from you as well. So, yeah, I want to thank you
great.
again, and to everyone on the channel, thank you for subscribing, and we will see you all next time.
Next time. Bye bye.